Hey everyone, drop a comment and let us know where you're listening from. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit that thumbs up button. Enjoy the story. At my nephew's birthday party, my mother-in-law decided to speak her mind about Keziah. Everyone here has children, she announced. She's the only one of us who is useless. My husband stayed silent, and that very evening, he kicked her out. 3 years later, she returned to her hometown with twins in her arms. You should have seen their faces when they found out who the father really was. But to understand how things reached that point, we need to go back 3 years to the day that split Keziah's life into before and after. A day that began with a secret hope and ended with the slam of a door and freezing rain. The restaurant, the Onyx Lounge, was buzzing like a disturbed beehive. Today they were celebrating the 5th birthday of Cairo, Xavier's nephew. His mother-in-law Zenobia Street Claire lived for these events. Not so much for the grandson, but for the opportunity to gather the whole family, all the business partners, and the movers and shakers under one roof to demonstrate the power and unity of the St. Clair clan. The air was heavy with the scent of expensive perfume, roasted meats, and the high-pitched squeals of children. Boys in sharp little suits and girls in poofy dresses darted between the tables, constantly risking knocking over a glass of champagne or a plate of appetizers onto someone. Keziah sat at the table, wringing her cold fingers beneath the tablecloth. She felt like an alien at this celebration of life. Around her, everyone was in pairs, threes, fours, parents with children, grandmothers with grandkids. There was Xavier's cousin, Tanisha, rocking her chubby infant, cooping something into his ear. There was a family friend, some local city councilman tossing his laughing daughter into the air. Families were everywhere, and Keziah was just with Xavier, an attachment to him. She tried to force a smile when the birthday boy himself, Cairo, ran past, smearing something sticky and chocolatey on her sleeve. She pulled out a wet wipe to scrub the stain from her modest gray dress. At that moment, Xavier's aunt, a heavy-set woman in a bright burgundy outfit, approached her. "Keziah, baby, why are you sitting all alone like an orphan?" she sang out, enveloping her in a wave of sickly sweet perfume. "Go on. Look at how precious the babies are. It's time for you too, honey. Past time. That clock is ticking." Keziah felt the heat rushed to her cheeks. She mumbled something incoherent about everything happening in its own time. The aunt shook her head sympathetically and walked away, her attention already shifting to someone else. But the sting remained. It was already the 3rd or 4th jab that evening. First, it was the wife of Xavier's partner with the innocent question, "Are you guys still not planning?" Then, a distant relative with a story about how her daughter barely managed to give birth before 35. Every word was like a small pebble thrown in her direction. They weren't trying to be mean. No, they were simply reminding her of her greatest failure, of that emptiness she couldn't fill. It had been 5 years of marriage to Xavier. She scanned the room for her husband. Xavier was standing by the bar with his cousin Langston. They were talking animatedly about something, laughing. Xavier looked relaxed and happy. He didn't notice her suffering, or he didn't want to. Keziah replayed the morning's conversation with the doctor in her head over and over again. The tests, the endless procedures. Keep trying. Everything should work out, the doctor had said. But years passed and nothing worked out. And with each passing year, the pressure from her husband's family became more unbearable, especially from Zenobia. Her mother-in-law was in her element today, dressed in a severe, perfectly tailored black suit with a high updo and a string of pearls around her neck. She moved through the hall like a queen surveying her dominion. She approached guests, exchanged a few phrases, and bestowed her icy smile upon them. Keziah felt Zenobia's gaze on her constantly, heavy, evaluating, judging. Zenobia never said anything directly to her face. Her weapons were hints, omissions, phrases thrown into the air, but intended precisely for Keziah's ears. Just then a huge cake in the shape of a pirate ship was brought out. The children crowded around, their eyes burning with delight. Cairo, beaming with happiness, blew out the candles to thunderous applause. His parents, Xavier's sister and her husband, stood nearby, hugging their son. Zenobia walked up to them, kissed her grandson on the top of his head, and in the momentary silence before the music started up again, her loud ringing voice sliced through the air. "Look at this. Joy," she proclaimed, sweeping her hand toward her daughter and her family. "Everyone with children, everyone contributing to the legacy. You are the only one, Keziah, who is useless to us." The word dropped into the silence, like a stone into water. It wasn't said with anger, but with a cold statement of fact, as if she were voicing a truth obvious to everyone. The music cut off. Conversations at nearby tables died down. Dozens of eyes stared at Keziah. She felt the blood drain from her face. The world narrowed to a single point, her husband's face. She looked at him, begging, silently screaming, "Say something. Defend me." But Xavier didn't look at her. He stared at his plate, picked up a fork, and began methodically picking at the remains of his salad. His silence was louder than any scream. It was a verdict. He agreed. He thought so, too. In that moment, Keziah realized she was alone. Absolutely alone in this room packed with people. Someone coughed awkwardly. The music started playing. Again. The party rolled on, flattening her like a steamroller. But for Keziah, it was over. She sat like a stone statue, seeing nothing and hearing nothing. She was just waiting for the moment she could leave. The drive home passed in deafening silence. Keziah stared out the window at the blurred city lights. Rain was starting to fall. Large drops drummed against the roof of the luxury sedan. Xavier gripping the steering wheel tightly. His profile was hard, unfamiliar. She wanted to scream, to ask why he stayed silent, why he allowed his mother to humiliate her like that. But she knew there would be no answer. His silence in the restaurant was the answer to all questions. They entered their apartment, the one they had furnished with such love 5 years ago. Xavier didn't even take off his coat. He stopped in the hallway and looked at her with cold, empty eyes. There was no sympathy in them, no regret, only a blank wall. "Mother is right," he said in a flat, lifeless voice. "I need a real family." Keziah froze, not believing her ears. This couldn't be happening. This was some kind of bad dream. "What?" she whispered. "Xavier, what are you saying?" "Pack your things," he cut her off. Those 3 words hit her in the gut, knocking the wind out of her. She looked at him, and the world around her began to crumble. 5 years of marriage, all the hopes, all the dreams, everything was turning to dust. "But where will I go?" Her voice trembled. "Xavier, please. That's not my problem." He turned away. "You have 30 minutes. He walked into the living room, leaving her alone in the hallway. She stood there swaying, grabbing the wall to keep from falling. 30 minutes. She was given 30 minutes to erase herself from his life. On legs that felt like cotton, she walked into the bedroom and opened the closet. There were her dresses, his shirts, their shared life. Mechanically, she began pulling out her things, throwing them into a small duffel bag, the first one that came to hand. Toothbrush, sweater, jeans. What else? Her head was empty. Her hands weren't obeying her. Tears flowed down her cheeks, but she didn't notice them. Xavier stood in the doorway, watching her, not like a husband, but like a warden. He was waiting for her to finish and get out of his house, out of his life. He offered no help, no money. He just waited. When she zipped up the bag, he silently opened the front door. The gesture was more eloquent than any words. "Get out." She walked out onto the landing. The door slammed behind her. The lock clicked. That was it. The end. Keziah walked down the stairs, exited the building, and found herself under the cold streams of autumn rain. It poured down on her, instantly soaking her thin coat. She walked, not knowing where she was going. The streets were deserted. Street lights cast trembling reflections on the wet asphalt. Every step echoed, with pain throughout her body. Useless. I need a real family. His words hammered in her temples. She walked until her legs began to give way from exhaustion and cold. Tears mixed with the rain, flowing down her face, her neck and her collar. She needed to wipe her face. She stopped under the awning of some corner store and shoved her hand into her purse, looking for a tissue or a napkin. Her fingers brushed past keys, a wallet, lipstick, and bumped into something. Hard, rectangular, a small cardboard box. Her heart stopped. She pulled it out. Her hands were shaking so badly, she almost dropped it onto the wet pavement. It was the box she had bought that morning. After the visit to the doctor, after his encouraging words, she had stopped at a pharmacy on a sudden impulse. She had taken the test right there in the mall restroom, and when she saw the result, her breath had caught in her throat. 2 clear, bright lines. She hadn't believed her eyes. The happiness had been so immense, so all-consuming, that she wanted to scream it to the whole world. She had decided she would tell Xavier tonight after the party. It was going to be their little secret, their victory over all the hardships. This baby was supposed to be the glue that would bond their family, silence all the relatives, make them truly happy. And now, standing in the rain, exiled and humiliated, Keziah stared at this box in her hands. She opened it. Inside lay the small plastic test with 2 lines. She was pregnant, and the husband who had just thrown her out on the street for being barren was the father of this child. Her secret joy, her hope for salvation, had turned into ash, into the cruelest mockery imaginable. 2 lines on a small piece of plastic in a rain-soaked hand. Keziah looked at them, and the world that had just collapsed suddenly froze. It stopped falling. It just hung in the void. She wasn't alone anymore. Inside her was life. His life. A child he didn't want from a woman he called useless. A laugh, bitter and soundless, stuck in her throat. The cold chilled her to the bone. The rain poured, relentlessly. She couldn't stay on the street. But where to go? To her parents? They lived in the same city. Rumors would reach them instantly. Zenobia would make sure of that. She imagined her mother crying and her father remaining gloomily silent, not knowing how to handle the shame of a daughter kicked out by her husband. No, she couldn't bring them this pain. Not now. One name floated to the surface of her mind. Ayanna, her friend from college. They hadn't talked much in recent years, but it was the kind of friendship that didn't rust. Ayanna lived in Savannah, far away, far enough that the echo of the scandal wouldn't reach there. Keziah found her phone in her purse. The battery was almost dead. She quickly dialed the number. The ring seemed to last an eternity. Hello. Ayanna's sleepy voice came through the receiver. Ayanna, it's Keziah. Her own voice was hoarse and unrecognizable. Keziah, what happened? Your voice, are you crying? Ayanna, can I come to stay with you for a couple of days? The words were torn out with difficulty. Silence hung on the line for a moment, and then came a firm, confident reply. Not for a couple of days. For how long is needed? Come. Whatever happened, just come. In those simple words, there was more warmth and support than in all 5 years of her marriage. Keziah ended the call before she burst into tears again. The phone died. Savannah. That meant the train station. She flagged down a rare late-night cab, gave the address of the Amtrak station, and stared out the window the whole way at the city that had been her home and had now become hostile territory. She was leaving everything behind. Her apartment, her life, her husband. The night train was half empty. She sat in a coach car, huddled in the corner by the window, watching the darkness rush by. The bag with her things lay on her lap. like a life preserver. She didn't sleep a wink. 2 words spun in her head: useless and pregnant. They collided, argued, giving her no peace. By morning, as the train crawled toward Savannah, something changed inside her. The pain hadn't gone anywhere, but over it, a thin but tough layer of cold fury began to grow. They wouldn't know. Not Xavier, not his mother. They had crossed her out of their lives. Now she would cross them out. This child would be hers alone. He would never know his father, who had rejected him before he was even born. He would never see his grandmother, who called his mother useless. It was her decision, hard as steel. Ayanna met her at the platform. She didn't ask anything, just hugged her tight, took her bag, and led her to her car. In her small but cozy 1-bedroom apartment, it smelled of coffee and peace. Kezia was able to exhale for the first time in 24 hours. She told Ayanna everything, almost everything, about the humiliation at the party, about Zenobia's words, about how Xavier put her out. She kept quiet about only one thing: the little box that now lay at the bottom of her bag. That was her secret, her anchor in this new, stormy world. The first weeks passed in a fog. Kezia slept, making up for all the sleepless nights spent in tears and anxiety. She helped Ayanna around the house, cooked, stayed silent a lot. Ayanna was the perfect friend. She didn't pry into her soul, didn't offer advice. She was just there. But a new life required new rules. Kezia knew she couldn't sponge off her friend forever. She needed to get back on her feet for herself and for the one growing inside her. First things first, a doctor. She made an appointment at a regular women's clinic using her maiden name, Price. Sitting in the waiting room among other pregnant women, she felt like an imposter. Everyone had husbands, support, a future. She only had a past she had fled from and a foggy present. In the ultrasound room, it was cool. The young doctor, with a tired but kind face, applied cold gel to her belly and began moving the sensor. "All right, let's see what we have here," she mumbled, peering at the monitor. Kezia held her breath. She looked at the black and white blurry image, trying to make out anything at all. Okay, uterine pregnancy, term. About 12 weeks. Everything looks good, developing on schedule. Heartbeat is clear. Kezia exhaled. Thank God. Everything is fine. The doctor suddenly fell silent, squinting and moving the sensor slightly to the side. She chuckled. Interesting, she drawled. Are you aware, Mama, that you have a surprise here? Kezia's heart dropped to her heels. What surprise? Is something wrong? The doctor smiled and turned the monitor toward her. Very much right. It's just that you don't have one little heart beating here, but two. Kezia stared at the screen. She didn't understand anything. The doctor pointed a finger at one flickering spot, then at another. Here's one, and here's the second. Congratulations. You're having twins. Twins. The word hung in the air. Not one child, but two. Two. Her secret, her burden, her hope. Everything instantly doubled. She felt tears flowing down her cheeks again. But this time they weren't tears of grief. It was some crazy cocktail of terror and delight. She was alone, broke, unemployed in a strange city, and she was going to have 2 children. It was madness, and it was the most beautiful thing she had ever heard in her life. Returning to Ayanna's apartment, Kezia was in a daze. 2, she needed even more strength, even more determination. She began unpacking her single bag to make room for future baby things. The items from her past life were laughably few. Some clothes, cosmetics, a couple of books she was reading before she left, and among them a small, tattered hardcover notebook. She recognized it. It was the diary of Xavier's grandmother, Pearl Street Clare, who had died a year before their wedding. The notebook had somehow ended up with Kezia along with other old papers, and she had just shoved it on a shelf, intending to give it to Zenobia someday, and in her haste, She must have swept it into the bag along with the books.
She
Wanted to throw it away. It was a reminder of the family she wanted to forget. But something stopped her. Maybe curiosity, maybe a desire to find at least some answer to the question of why everything happened this way.
She sat on
The sofa and opened the first page. The entries were made in neat, cramped handwriting. Mostly they were household. Notes about the weather, the garden, the grandchildren. Keziah flipped through the pages, barely reading anything, and suddenly her gaze snagged on a familiar name.
Zenobia.
The entry was made many years ago when Xavier was still small. May 15th had another difficult conversation with Zenobia. She started her song about an heir again. My heart breaks for my son, for my Thomas. Doctors say the chances are slim, but that's not a death sentence. Yet Zenobia is acting like she's lost her mind, running to doctors, demanding, looking for some exits. Yesterday, she came with wild eyes, saying that if her husband can't do it, then a way must be found so the family name doesn't end. That the family honor is more important than anything. I'm afraid of her. There is some evil bad fire burning in her. Obsession is not of God. It seems she is ready to do anything just to get this heir. Anything. Keziah reread the lines again and again. Thomas was Xavier's father.
He had
Problems. He could barely have children. And Zenobia, even back then 30 years ago, was obsessed with the idea of an heir ready for anything. A chill ran down her spine. She had always thought her mother-in-law's attacks were a personal dislike for her. Keziah, that her cruelty was born out of her and Xavier's 5 years of failure.
But
This entry spoke of something else. It wasn't personal.
it
Was an old, deeply rooted mania. A whole family history she hadn't suspected. Zenobia's fixation on children, on continuing the line, wasn't just the whim of a domineering woman. It was her. Decades along, agonized, insane idea fix. Xia slammed the diary shut.
she
Felt uneasy. This information was strange, disturbing. She didn't know what to do with it. For a moment she wanted to call Xavier, tell him, ask him, but she immediately pulled herself back. No, that door is closed.
the past.
Must remain in the past. These are just old family dramas. A fluke, a coincidence. She didn't have time to unravel other people's secrets. She had 2 secrets of her own that would soon come into the world. She shoved the diary to the bottom of the bag under sweaters out of sight. And that same evening, to chase away the bad thoughts, she did what always calmed her down. She went into the kitchen and baked a peach
Cobbler.
simple from her mother's recipe. The smell of cinnamon, vanilla, and baked peaches filled the small apartment. When Ayana came home from work, she gasped. The cobbler was incredibly delicious. The next day, she asked Ayana to bring her more flour and sugar. Then she baked more. She baked cakes, pastries, rolls, first for herself and Ayana. Then Ayana started taking the pastries to work. Her colleagues were delighted. The first birthday order came in. Then the second, the third. Keziah worked tirelessly, often late into the night. Fatigue knocked her off her feet. Her back ached. But when she took another golden masterpiece out of the oven, she felt satisfaction. She was creating something with her own hands. It wasn't useless. And it brought in the first small, but her own money. She was no longer an attachment to a husband. She was Keziah Price, and soon she would be a mom of 2 children. This thought gave her strength. She chased away memories of Zenobia's words, of Xavier's silence, of the disturbing lines from the old diary. She just worked, pouring all her unspent love and desperate determination into dough, cream, and chocolate glaze. She was building a new life from scratch, alone. 3 years passed. 3 years that transformed Keziah from a broken victim into the mistress of her own life. The smell of vanilla, fresh brewed coffee, and dark chocolate became the scent of her new world. Keziah's Sweets in downtown Savannah was her fortress and her pride. A small, cozy establishment with a display case always full of delicate pastries and impressive cakes became a local landmark. Keziah was no longer Xavier's wife. She was that Miss Price who bakes divine eclairs. Her morning didn't start with an alarm clock, but with quiet rustling in the nursery. Kenzo and Kalia her double. Most important secret. Her two hearts beating outside her body. They were her world, light-skinned with identical dimples on their cheeks, but so different in character. Kenzo, a curious and noisy explorer. Kalia, a quiet, thoughtful observer. In the morning, she took them to daycare and then dove headfirst into work, purchases, staff, management, developing new recipes, taking orders. In the evening, she picked up the children and the three of them had dinner in their small rented apartment above the bakery. She read them stories, kissed the tops of their heads, and when they fell asleep, she felt complete, exhaustive happiness. She had made it. She had survived. She hardly thought about the past. It was locked in an old diary at the bottom of a suitcase and in that part of her soul where she tried not to look. She knew nothing about Xavier, about Zenobia, about that life, and she didn't want to know. She had cut all ties, changed her phone number. Her only contact with her hometown was infrequent calls to her parents from Ayana's landline. She told them she had left for work, that she was doing well. She kept quiet about the children. She was afraid the news would somehow reach the St. Clairs. She was protecting her children from that poison. And then one evening a phone call rang out that pierced the armor of her new life. It was her father calling. His voice was tight, unfamiliar. Keziah, Mom is bad. Very bad. Her heart. She's in the hospital. Keziah's world tilted. Mom, her only closest soul. I see you. Heart attack. These words beat against her consciousness like hail against glass. No time for fear, for doubts, for old resentments. Mom needed her. She packed the kids in an hour, explained to her assistant at the bakery that she had to leave for family reasons. She bought tickets for the next train. All night to the clatter of wheels, she watched sleeping Kenzo and Kalia and felt icy fear of returning. Battle within her against anxiety for her mother. She was going back into the hell she had climbed out of with such difficulty. Her hometown met her with a gray sky and a damp wind. Nothing had changed. The same streets, the same houses. Only she was different. When her father met her at the station and saw two small children next to her, he froze. In his eyes was a whole storm of emotions. Shock, surprise, confusion, and some belated tenderness. Is this? He started, unable to find the words. Your grandchildren, Daddy, Keziah said. Quietly. Kenzo and Kalia. In the hospital room, Mom looked small and fragile under the white sheet. But when she saw her grandchildren, her pale face lit up with such a smile that Keziah's breath caught. She realized she had done the right thing. It was worth returning for this moment. But the city had already noticed her. A small town lives on rumors. The next day, when Keziah went out to the nearest store for groceries, Miss Jenkins, a neighbor from her parents' old apartment building, stared at her. Her eyes went round when she saw two toddlers holding Keziah's hands tightly. Keziah, baby, you're back. And whose precious children are these? Her voice was full of sugary curiosity. Keziah smiled politely and, without answering, hurried away. But she knew the mechanism was launched. By evening, their entire old neighborhood would be buzzing. Keziah Price, formerly Street Claire, the one whose husband kicked her out, was back and not alone, but with two children. She tried not to leave the house unnecessarily, spending all her time at her mother's bedside or with the children in her parents' apartment. But a few days later, the doctor said Mom needed fresh fruit, specifically pomegranates. She had to go to the Central Market. The market was humming, smelling of dill and ripe apples. Keziah walked confidently between the rows, holding Kenzo and Kalia by the hands. She had almost forgotten about caution, focusing on choosing the best, ripest pomegranates. She was already paying the vendor when Kenzo tugged at her sleeve. "Mama, look, man," he said, pointing a finger somewhere behind her back. Keziah turned around and froze. A few yards away from her stood Xavier. He had hardly changed. The same haircut, the same expensive coat she had once helped him choose. Only his face had become harder, and wrinkles had settled in the corners of his eyes. He looked at her, and on his face was written one thing: absolute, paralyzing shock. He looked at her, then shifted his gaze to the two identical, light-skinned children at her feet, then back at her. He went as pale as if he'd seen a ghost. But he wasn't alone. Next to him, slightly behind, stood a young, very beautiful woman. She had shiny dark hair, perfect makeup, and an elegant sand-cold cashmere coat. She looked expensive, groomed, confident. She looked with bewilderment first at the frozen Xavier, then at Keziah. An eternity seemed to pass before Xavier
Could make a sound.
He took a step forward, then another.
Keziah. His
voice was ill. "Xavier," she answered evenly. She surprised herself with her calmness. Inside, everything shrank into an icy ball, but her voice didn't tremble. She instinctively pulled Kenzo and Kalia closer, shielding them with her body.
Xavier shifta a confusa gaja.
To his companion. It was clear he was fighting himself, not knowing what to do. Finally, he squeezed it out. "Meet, this is Sarah, my wife." Wife. My wife. The word hit like a slap in the face. Here she was, the one who came to take her place, the one who turned out to be useful, the one for whom it was worth throwing her Keziah out onto the street. In the rain, she looked at Soraya's perfect face, at her expensive clothes, and felt that old, almost forgotten pain returning, but along with it rose another feeling: cold, furious pride. She straightened her back. "Hello," she threw out coldly, not even looking at Soraya. Her gaze was riveted on Xavier. He was looking at the children. In his eyes splashed a storm: disbelief, curiosity, suspicion. He opened his mouth to ask something, but never did. The awkwardness became almost tangible. "We have to go," he said, finally taking Soraya by the arm and practically dragging her away. He didn't even say goodbye, just fled. Keziah watched them
Go.
She saw his tense back, saw Soraya saying something confusedly to him.
They
Were moving away, turning into two figures in the crowd, and at the moment they turned the corner of the market row, Soraya turned in profile. Keziah involuntarily squinted. The cashmere coat was cut loosely, but even it couldn't hide what was underneath: a clear, rounded, large belly.
Sarah
Wasn't just married to her ex-husband. She was heavily pregnant. He had found himself not just a replacement.
he had
Found himself a real family. And soon he would have an heir. The very one Zenobia craved so much, and the one she, Keziah, couldn't give him. Useless Keziah. Keziah stood in the middle of the noisy market, tightly clutching a bag of pomegranates in one hand and her children's palms in the other. The image of pregnant Soraya imprinted on her retina like a camera flash. There it was, visual proof of her, Keziah's worthlessness, and the triumph of the new correct wife. A cold wave of rage rose from the depths of her soul, not for herself, for Kenzo and Kalia, for the fact that their father had so easily traded their mother for another without even knowing of their existence. She turned around and walked away, leading the children with her. The meeting at the market became the stone that caused the avalanche. The city buzzed.
now.
Everyone knew Keziah was back with two children no one had ever seen.
And
Xavier Street Claire, her ex-husband, was about to become a father again, but this time with a new wife. Gossip crawled through the city like a snake, penetrating every crack. Keziah knew it was only a matter of time before the main source of poison reached her. And she wasn't mistaken.
It happened, A.
Couple of days later, Mom was due to be discharged soon, and Keziah, taking advantage of the good weather, took the children to a small square near the house. Kenzo and Kalia chased pigeons with squeals, and she sat on a bench, enjoying a rare moment of peace. She was so absorbed in watching them that she didn't notice a tall, upright figure in a familiar black coat stop next to her. "I knew you'd come crawling back."
Then
"Icy," contemptuous voice rang out. "Ran out of money?" Keziah slowly raised her head. Zenobia Streetclair. She looked the same as she did 3 years ago.
the
Same perfect styling, the same haughty posture. Only her eyes looked even. Meaner, even. Harder. She measured Keziah with a scornful look and then shifted it to the playing children. "Drag some bastards here to make my son feel sorry for you? Decided to pin some other man's brood on him?" The words were like spit in the face. 3 years ago Keziah would have shrunk, cried, run away. But now a different woman sat before Zenobia, a woman who had been building her life alone for 3 years and raising 2 children. Keziah stood up. She was the same height as Zenobia. She looked her straight in the eyes, cold and calm. "These are my children, Mrs. St. Clair, and I will ask you to stay away from them and from me." Zenobia sneered. "Are you threatening me?
You who my son threw out like a strikeout.
You crawled back to our city to blackmail us, to shame our family before the birth of the legitimate heir. I won't allow it." She raised her voice, attracting the attention of rare passers.
By
But Keziah didn't flinch. "I came to my sick mother," she enunciated clearly. "And your fantasies don't interest me. If you come near me or my children one more time, I'll call the police." She beckoned Kenzo and Kalia, took their hands, and without looking back, walked out of the park. She felt her mother-in-law's burning gaze full of hatred on her back. She knew this wasn't the end. It was a declaration of war. Returning home, Keziah sat in the kitchen for a long time. Her hands were shaking. She understood that Zenobia wouldn't stop. She would spread rumors, turn people against her, try to paint her as a con artist. And Keziah's most vulnerable spot was her children. Zenobia had already called them another man's brood. She would scream about it on every corner. She needed to defend herself, and the best defense is a good offense. The next day, she found the number of a good lawyer online. A young, energetic woman named Ms. Davis listened to her story carefully, without interrupting. "They will claim you are a fraud," Miss Davis said when Keziah finished. "That the children aren't his and you want money. It's classic. We need to strike first. File for paternity, establishment, and child support. Officially through the court. Paternity establishment, a DNA test." The thought of it was unpleasant. It meant letting Xavier back into their lives, at least formally. But Miss Davis was right. It was the only way to shut Zenobia's mouth. A document, an official document, proving that Kenzo and Kalia were Xavier's children and that she had every right to his financial support. It wasn't about the money. Keziah was managing perfectly fine on her own. It was about the truth and protecting her children's honor. "Prepare the documents," Keziah said firmly. A few days later, an official paper from the court was delivered to Xavier St. Clair's office. A lawsuit demanding a paternity test. Keziah had pulled the trigger. Now there was no turning back. She waited for a reaction, an angry call from Xavier, new threats from Zenobia. But instead, something completely unexpected happened. In the evening, when the children were already asleep, the doorbell of her parents' apartment rang. Keziah looked through the peephole and froze. On the threshold stood Soraya, Xavier's wife, alone. She looked completely different from how she had at the market. No haughtiness or gloss. She was wearing a simple dark dress, hair pulled back in a messy bun. Her face was pale without makeup, and fear stood in her large eyes. Keziah hesitated but then opened the door. "What do you want?" she asked coldly. "Can I come in, please?" It's very important, and I don't want to talk in the hallway. Soraya's voice trembled. Kazia led her into the kitchen.
She
Didn't offer her a seat or tea. She just stood with her arms crossed over her chest and waited. Soraya looked around, restlessly like a hunted animal. I'm here about the lawsuit, she began, fiddling with the strap of her expensive bag. Xavier got the papers.
So, Kazia.
Shot back. Soraya took a step forward. I'm asking you, I'm begging.
You.
Withdraw it. Drop the lawsuit. Kazia chuckled. So that you and your mother-in-law can continue telling the whole town that I'm loose and brought home some other man's kids. No thanks.
It's not about that.
You don't understand. Soraya almost dropped to a whisper. She put her bag on the table, opened it, and pulled out a thick leather briefcase. She clicked the locks and opened it. Inside lay stacks of money. A lot of money. Here, she exhaled. There's enough here for you to buy an apartment, anywhere to leave, and never come back. Just withdraw the application. Disappear, please.
Kazia
Looked at the money, then at Sarah's terrified face. Something was wrong here. This didn't look like the arrogant revenge of a wealthy rival. It looked like desperation. Do you think I can be bought?
Kazia
Asked calmly. You're mistaken. I won't take your money. Please.
Tears
Glistened in Soraya's eyes. You don't understand what Zenobia's lair is capable of. You can't imagine this test. It will ruin everything. Everything for all of us. For me, for Xavier, and for you, too. Kazia looked at her in complete confusion. The panic in this woman's voice was genuine.
But why? Why?
Is Xavier's new pregnant wife so desperately afraid of a test that should logically prove any other children aren't her husband's, confirming her own child as the sole heir? Why offer huge money to prevent something that logically should only benefit her? Her words made no sense.
Her panic was
Irrational. Unless, of course, she had her own terrible secret that this test might accidentally expose. Get out, Kazia said, pointing to the door. And take your money. Soraya looked at her with despair, her face twisted.
She
Slowly closed the briefcase, clicked the locks, and without saying another word, walked out of the apartment. Kazia locked the door behind her on all locks and leaned her back against it. Her heart was pounding. What was that? Why is Soraya so afraid of this test?
It
will ruin everything for all of us. What does that mean? Logic dictated that the pregnant wife should be the first person interested in proving her husband's other children aren't his. But Soraya was acting like this test was a bomb that would blow up her own world. Suspicions previously vague and shapeless began to take form. Something was wrong, deeply, fundamentally wrong, in this whole story. And it was connected not just to her exile, but to Soraya's appearance, her pregnancy, and the panic over the DNA test. And then Kazia remembered the tattered old diary of Xavier's grandmother, which still lay at the bottom of her suitcase. The entry about Zenobia's insane obsession with an heir, about her husband's problems, about her willingness to do anything. Back then, Kazia had brushed it off, chalking it up to old family dramas.
But
now, after Soraya's visit, those words sounded new, ominous. She took out the diary, rereading that page again and again, ready to do anything just to get this heir. What if these weren't just words? What if it was a plan? A puzzle began to assemble in her head, but key pieces were missing. She needed someone who had known the St. Clair family for a long time, someone she could trust, and she remembered Dr. Thaddeus, the old family doctor who had treated her when she was a child. He was a friend of her parents, a good-natured, gay-haired old man with shrewd eyes. He had long retired, but kept a private practice, consulting for old time's sake. He knew the St. Clair family too. He was their doctor even before they became a clan. She needed a pretext. Kazia decided it would be a routine checkup for the children. Perfect cover. She called him the next day. Dr. Thaddeus was happy too. hear her voice, asked about her mom, wished her a speedy recovery. He readily agreed to see her and the children in his office, which was located in his big old house. Dr. Thaddeus's office smelled of medicine and old books. Everything was like in childhood. The heavy oak desk, glass cabinets with instruments, an anatomical poster on the wall. He was very affectionate with Kenzo and Kalia, examined them, listened to their chests, looked in their throats, said the children were perfectly healthy and developing beautifully. When the exam was over and the children busied themselves studying the aquarium in the corner, Kazuya took the plunge. She started from afar. Dr. Thaddeus, I was going through some old things and found something curious. The diary of Pearl Street Claire, my ex-husband's grandmother. The doctor looked up at her from his papers. Yes, I remember her. A wonderful woman, not like some he cut himself off not finishing the
phrase.
There were some very strange entries, Kazuya continued, watching his reaction closely. About her son Thomas, Zenobia's husband, and about how Zenobia was obsessed with the idea of an heir. Allegedly, they had some difficulties with that many years ago. At the mention of Zenobia and the heir, the good-natured expression vanished from Dr. Thaddeus's face. He tensed, took off his glasses, wiped them with a handkerchief, put them back on. His fingers tapped nervously on the desk. Old business, Kazuya, he said in a voice slightly sharper than usual. Why stir this up? It just seemed familiar to me, she said cautiously. That obsession of hers.
She
tormented me with it for 5 years, too. And then Xavier kicked me out, said he needed a real family, and I was useless. She spoke those words, and something in the doctor's face twitched. He looked at the playing children, then back at Kazuya. His gaze became heavy, full of some old regret. He was silent for a long time, staring at one spot.
Kazuya didn't rush
him. She felt that he knew something, that he was fighting himself. Finally, he sighed heavily. I'm probably an old fool, he murmured, quietly, almost in a whisper. Thought it was just female hysterics, that it would resolve itself. But look how it turned out. He raised his eyes to her. There was no trace of medical detachment left in them, only human fatigue and guilt. It was a long time ago, about 7 or 8 years before your divorce. Zenobia came to me alone without her husband. She brought a whole folder of Xavier's tests, old ones, new ones. She got them somewhere, and she started grilling me. Dr. Thaddeus stood up, walked to the window, and turned his back to Kazuya. She was convinced Xavier had problems, that he couldn't have children, showed me these papers, demanded confirmation. I looked there. Wasn't anything critical. Well, yes, indicators weren't ideal, but that's every second man. It didn't mean anything definitive. I told her so. He fell silent, gathering his thoughts.
But
that didn't suit her. She didn't listen. She was like a wound-up toy. Said she couldn't allow it, that the Street Claire line shouldn't end with her son. And then she started asking about other things. He turned and looked Kazuya straight in the eye. She asked about sperm donors, about artificial insemination, asked for contacts of clinics that do this. He paused, choosing the word carefully. Discreetly, she talked about some alternative solutions if official methods didn't work. She had a crazy look. I got angry, then told her to stop this nonsense and not meddle in her son's life. Told her she was insane, and her pressure would only ruin everything. I practically kicked her out of the office. He turned back to the window. I thought she listened to me, calmed down. I brushed it off as the obsessive idea of a crazy mother. I even forgot about that conversation. And then when I heard Xavier married you, I was even happy. Thought, well, now she'll leave him alone. And then rumors reached me that you didn't have children, and then that he kicked you out. He turned, and in his eyes stood realization mixed with horror. And now you tell me about this diary, about Pearl, that this was her obsession 30 years ago, too. Lord, I didn't understand. I didn't understand anything. She wasn't just hysterical. She had a plan. She always had it. Kazia sat thunderstruck. The picture was clearing up with terrifying speed. Zenobia didn't just suspect Xavier. Couldn't have children. She was sure of it, and she wasn't going to accept it. She was looking for a discreet solution. Long before Kazia couldn't get pregnant, long before she was called useless and kicked out, her exile wasn't a spontaneous decision due to a lack of grandchildren. It was part of something else, something terrible and calculated. Zenobia was looking for a way around the problem. And if she didn't find it in a donor clinic, where did she find it? And what role was she, Kazia, supposed to play in this plan? Kazia walked out of Dr. Thaddeus's office in a total daze. She thanked him, mechanically dressed the children, and went out onto the street. The sunny day seemed unnaturally bright to her, and Kenzo and Kalia's laughter sounded as if from far away. One thought beat in her head. She had a plan. She always had it. She walked home. On autopilot. The doctor's words, Sarah's panic, lines from the diary. All of this folded into a single monstrous picture. Zenobia was sure Xavier was infertile, but she needed an heir at any cost. An heir with a St. Clair name. She was looking for a discreet solution. And if a donor from a clinic is too official and leaves a paper trail, what could be more discreet? What if? And then it hit her like an electric shock. St. Clair blood, the street Clair name, Langston, Xavier's cousin. Also a street Clair, ambitious, always a bit in the shadow of his more successful cousin, but with the same last name. Cold sweat broke out on Kazia. She stopped in the middle of the street. Flashes of memories she hadn't attached importance to before began racing through her head. Langston was always nearby, always emphatically polite with her, always appeared at the right moment. She wrote it off as friendly participation, family, feelings. But what if it was something else? Her mind worked feverishly, rewinding the tape of the last months of her marriage. She tried to latch on to something, some detail, and she remembered the lake house. About a month before she was kicked out, Zenobia threw a big reception for business partners. There was a lot of alcohol, loud music, bustle. Xavier was not himself that evening. He was tense. And after one of the toasts, which was made by Langston to the health of future heirs, he started drinking nonstop. He drank fast, gulping as if he wanted to drown something out. By the middle of the evening, he was gone, just sitting in an armchair with an empty stare, not reacting to anything. Zenobia approached him, then shook her head and said something like, fell apart again.
No backbone.
Kazia felt uneasy then from that atmosphere, from her drunk husband, from the commotion. She got a headache. She wanted to leave, but Xavier had the car keys, and he was in no state to drive. And then Langston appeared nearby. Kazia, you look bad, he said with showy concern. Let me get you some water. Aunt Zenobia has a special herbal blend for headaches. He brought her a glass of water. She remembered the water had a strange bitter aftertaste. She took a few sips, but it didn't get better. On the contrary, her head spun even more. Weakness appeared in her legs. You need to go home and rest, Langston said decisively. Let's go. I'll drive you. I'll leave my car here. Pick it up in the morning. The guys will deliver Xavier later. He spoke so confidently and solicitously that she agreed. She remembered how he led her to his car, holding her arm tightly, his hand on her waist, the way he helped her into the car, and his fingers lingered on her shoulder longer than necessary. It was unpleasant. She felt vulnerable, weak. She wrote it off as her condition. The dizziness. On the way, he said something encouraging about how Xavier just needed to rest. That business is stressful. She hardly listened. She only wanted one thing, to get home and lie down. He walked her to the very door of the apartment. She thanked him and quickly closed the door behind him. Back. Then it seemed like just an unpleasant episode, a drunken husband, an untimely Headache, the overly intrusive courtesy of a cousin. But now it all looked completely different. Xavier was purposefully gotten drunk. She was given strange water that made her sick, and Langston happened to be nearby, ready to help. What was supposed to happen next? What if she hadn't locked the door so quickly? What if she had been even weaker and more disoriented? Her chest went cold with the horror of this guess. It wasn't just a plan. It was a conspiracy, vile, dirty, thought out to the smallest detail. And Zenobia was its conductor. But these were only guesses, memories, sensations. She needed proof, at least something that would confirm her terrible theory. Arriving home, she put the children to sleep, and she sat down at the old laptop she brought with her. All her archives, all photos from her past life, were stored there. She began feverishly searching for a folder named Lakehouseception. She opened it. Dozens of photos. Here are guests with glasses. Here is the barbecue. Here is drunk Xavier in the chair. She looked through them one by one, looking for at least something, but nothing. Ordinary photos from a drunken party. She had almost despaired when her gaze snagged on one shot. It was taken almost accidentally, apparently by one of the guests. In the foreground were her, Keziah, and Langston. They were standing by the exit of the house. She looked tired, and he was saying something to her, leaning in solicitously. He was holding that very glass of water, an ordinary, unremarkable photo. She wanted to scroll past, but something stopped her. Behind them, on the wall of the veranda, hung a large decorative mirror in a row iron frame. And in this mirror, the hallway of the house was reflected. Keziah zoomed in on the image. Her heart pounded at a breakneck speed. She zoomed in more and more until the picture began to break into pixels. But even so, it was visible. In the dark opening of the corridor deep in the house stood a figure, a female figure. It was Zenobia. She wasn't participating in the general fun. She stood in the shadows and watched right at them, at Keziah and Langston. And on her face, there was no concern for her daughter-in-law who felt sick. There was not a shadow of sympathy. It was an expression of cold, focused, predatory observation, like a scientist looking at lab mice in a maze. She didn't just know what was happening. She was controlling the process. She was waiting for the result of her experiment. This was it, irrefutable proof. A black and white reflection in a mirror fixing the truth. Everything fell into place. Zenobia's plan was simple and monstrous. She decided to use Keziah as an incubator, and as a discreet donor, she chose Langston, her nephew, the carrier of the necessary blood. She set up a situation where the incapacitated drunk husband was removed, and the weakened, disoriented wife was left alone with the caring relative, and she personally watched the execution of her plan. But the plan failed. Something went wrong. Maybe Keziah turned out not to be so weak. Maybe Langston didn't dare to go through with it. Zenobia, deciding the attempt failed and convinced of Keziah's uselessness, simply ordered her son to kick her out. She didn't suspect that at the very moment she was crossing out her daughter-in-law, she was already pregnant, but not from Langston, but from her own infertile son. And then 3 years later, Keziah returned with 2 children. For Zenobia, it was a shock. Living, walking proof of her failed conspiracy. She decided they were Langston's children, that her plan had worked after all. But the fruits didn't go to her. That's why she started screaming that it was another man's brood. That's why she tried so furiously to disown them. And that's why Soraya, her new puppet, is so terrified of the DNA test. Because this test will show that the children aren't Langston's, and this will destroy the whole construct of lies Zenobia had been building for years. Keziah leaned back in her chair. There was a hum in her ears. The monster she feared turned out to be even scarier than she could have imagined, and now she knew its name. She knew the plan. And she had a weapon in her hands, a small photograph, a reflection in a mirror, reflected truth.
Keziah sat in
Front of the laptop screen, staring at the magnified reflection in the mirror. Cold horror was replaced by icy, crystal clear rage. She saw everything, the whole mechanism, the whole lie.
She
Wasn't just a victim of family squabbles. She was chosen for the role of a vessel, a nameless incubator for other people's plans. And when she turned out to be defective, she was thrown away like a broken thing. But they were wrong.
She
Didn't break. And now she had everything to destroy their world. Diary, doctors, confession, and photograph. But how to do it?
Just go to the police.
They won't. Bother with old family intrigues. Tell Xavier. He won't believe it. His mother was always an authority to him, and he was too weak to go against her. Something else was needed. Not just
Court.
a public sentence was needed. One from which Zenobia would never recover. The idea came suddenly. Her bakery in Savannah often held charity evenings.
It
Was a great way to attract attention and do a good deed. What if she organized something similar here in her hometown? A charity auction for the local orphanage? This is an event that no one from the city elite can ignore, especially the St. Clair family, who prided themselves so much on their reputation and philanthropy. They will be obliged to come. Everyone, Zenobia and Xavier and Soraya and Langston, they will come to their own execution. It will be her stage, her theater. Mom was already feeling better. She was transferred from the ICU to a regular room. Keziah, enlisting the support of her father and old friends, dove headfirst into organizing. She found a venue, a small but elegant banquet hall, arranged with local artists and craftsmen who provided lots for the auction, sent out invitations. The name, Keziah Price, formerly Street Claire, made noise. Everyone was curious to look at the woman who returned with children and sued her ex-husband. Curiosity and thirst for scandal are the best bait. She worked like one possessed. By day she handled organization. Evenings she spent with Mom and the kids. She had no time for fear or doubts, only cold calculation. She was preparing for the main battle of her life. The evening before the auction, Keziah returned home late,
completely exhausted.
Father had already put the children to bed. She sat in the kitchen drinking cold tea and replaying her plan in her head for the 100th time. Tomorrow, everything will be decided. Tomorrow. A quiet, almost panicked knock on the
Door sounded.
Keziah flinched. She went to the door, looked through the peephole. Soraya. She stood huddled, without a coat, in just a dress. Her face was wet with tears, mascara smeared, hair disheveled. She looked like a person on the verge of a nervous breakdown. Keziah opened the door.
What?
Now, she asked wearily. Did you bring more money? Soraya didn't answer.
She
Just walked into the apartment, sank onto a chair in the kitchen, dropped her head onto her arms, and sobbed. These weren't quiet tears like last time. It was hysteria, deep wrenching sobs, shaking her whole body. Keziah stood over her, not knowing what to do.
Part
Of her wanted to just kick this woman out the door, but the other part saw not a rival, but a broken, deathly, frightened person. Calm down, she said finally, softer than she intended. You'll wake the children. What happened? Soraya lifted her head. Her eyes were red and swollen. She knows everything, Soraya whispered. About your auction? She said, if I'm not there tomorrow and don't behave properly, she'll destroy me. She'll destroy my family, my father.
She sobbed.
Again. I can't take it anymore. Her voice broke into a scream. I can't live like this. It's not life. It's prison. Keziah poured a glass of water and slid it toward Soraya. Drink and explain everything in order. What does she know? What are you so afraid of? Soraya took a few convulsive sips. She calmed down a little, but she was still shaking. My father, he had business problems, big
Debts.
Zenobia offered help. She paid everything off. And in return, I had to marry Xavier. So that's it. A marriage of convenience.
Not.
Surprising. It was just a contract. Soraya continued, staring into the void. I was supposed to become the ideal wife, bear an heir, and strengthen the family image. Xavier didn't care. He just does what his mother tells him. He's empty. There's nothing inside him. She chuckled.
Bitterly.
I agreed. I thought I could handle it, but I didn't know what I was getting into. She controls my every step, every breath, what I wear, what I eat, who I talk to. I'm her doll. Her project called Ideal Daughter-in-Law. Soraya fell silent, gathering the courage for the most important part. And then you appeared with the children.
She
Went crazy. She was furious. She screamed that you would ruin everything, that everyone would doubt Xavier is capable of having children. And then she came up with this. She looked at Keziah, and in her eyes was a plea for forgiveness. She forced me to shut everyone up to show that everything is fine with her son since his new wife got pregnant so quickly. It began to dawn on Keziah slowly, like in a nightmare. I'm not pregnant, Keziah. The words fell into the silence of the kitchen. What? Keziah whispered, not believing her.
ears.
Soraya stood up. She unzipped the side of her elegant dress. Under the dress was a special construction of straps. She unbuckled them too and took it off. A large, perfectly imitating silicone belly at 7 or 8 months of pregnancy, a silicone prosthetic.
She
Put it on the table. Under the dress, she had an absolutely flat stomach. Keziah looked at this piece of silicone on the table, then at Soraya, and couldn't utter a word. This whole spectacle all this time, it was a lie. A grandiose, brazen, monstrous lie. She bought it in New York, Sarah said quietly. Forced me to wear it. Go to her doctor, who confirmed the pregnancy. She wanted to announce the birth of a child, and then say he was born weak and died. Or invent something else just to buy time, just to create an illusion, just to destroy you and your truth. Soraya sank onto the chair again.
She
Was completely devastated. I can't take it anymore. I'm afraid of her. But I can't live like this anymore either. Tomorrow she'll force me to come to your auction, smile, and demonstrate my happiness to everyone. And I want this all to end. She raised tear-stained eyes to Keziah. I will help you, she said firmly. I will do whatever you say. Just finish her. Burn her down, please. At that moment, Keziah realized she had gained the most unexpected and powerful ally. She looked at the woman she considered her rival and saw not an enemy, but the same victim, just trapped in a different cage. The same monster tried to destroy both of them. Now there were 2 of them against her, and tomorrow's verdict would be final. Keziah didn't sleep all night. After Soraya left, she sat in the kitchen staring at the silicone belly lying on the table. This piece of plastic was the symbol of all Zenobia's madness. Her desperate, inhuman lie. Keziah's plan
changed.
It became harder, more precise. Now she didn't just have proof of an old conspiracy. She had a time bomb ticking.
Right now.
The next evening, the banquet hall was full. All the city's high society gathered here. Officials, businessmen, their dressed-up wives. Everyone came to gawk at the scandal under the guise of charity. Keziah saw their curious evaluating glances, heard their whispers, but she didn't care.
She was calm.
It was that cold, ringing calm that comes before jumping into an abyss. She saw them immediately. They sat at the central table in the front row. The Street Claire family. Zenobia in a severe evening gown the color of dark wine with flawless hair, straight and proud as a queen. Next to her, Xavier in an expensive suit with a frozen polite smile on his face. On the other side of him, Soraya. She was in a loose flowing dress that artfully draped her pregnancy. Her face was pale as a sheet, but she held herself together as
promised.
Slightly apart, sat Langston with a glass of champagne in his hand, looking around the hall smugly. They were a picture of success and prosperity, the ideal family.
The
auction began. Kazuya, as the organizer, was supposed to give a welcome speech. She went up to the small stage to the microphone. All eyes were fixed on her. She saw Zenobia smirk almost imperceptibly, probably expecting Kazuya to say something pathetic, beg for sympathy. Kazuya swept the hall with a calm gaze. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I thank each of you who came today to support our Hope House orphanage." She began in an even, confident voice. She said a few general phrases about the importance of mercy, about helping children, and then paused. "You know, children are the most precious thing we have. They are our future, our continuation. But sometimes, the desire to have this continuation becomes a dangerous obsession for people. So dangerous that they are ready to destroy other people's lives." Tense anticipation hung in the hall. The smile slid off Zenobia's face. She sensed something was going wrong. 3 years ago, Kazuya continued, and her voice became harder. "In this very city, I was publicly called useless because in 5 years of marriage, I couldn't bear a
child.
My husband, the man I loved, stayed silent. And that same evening he
Put me out on the charity."
Kazuya saw their curious evaluating glances, heard their whispers, but she didn't care.
She was calm.
It was that cold, ringing calm that comes before jumping into an abyss. She saw them immediately. They sat at the central table in the front row. The Street Claire family. Zenobia in a severe evening gown the color of dark wine with flawless hair, straight and proud as a queen. Next to her, Xavier in an expensive suit with a frozen polite smile on his face. On the other side of him, Soraya. She was in a loose flowing dress that artfully draped her pregnancy. Her face was pale as a sheet, but she held herself together as
promised.
Slightly apart, sat Langston with a glass of champagne in his hand, looking around the hall smugly. They were a picture of success and prosperity, the ideal family.
The
auction began. Kazuya, as the organizer, was supposed to give a welcome speech. She went up to the small stage to the microphone. All eyes were fixed on her. She saw Zenobia smirk almost imperceptibly, probably expecting Kazuya to say something pathetic, beg for sympathy. Kazuya swept the hall with a calm gaze. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I thank each of you who came today to support our Hope House orphanage." She began in an even, confident voice. She said a few general phrases about the importance of mercy, about helping children, and then paused. "You know, children are the most precious thing we have. They are our future, our continuation. But sometimes, the desire to have this continuation becomes a dangerous obsession for people. So dangerous that they are ready to destroy other people's lives." Tense anticipation hung in the hall. The smile slid off Zenobia's face. She sensed something was going wrong. 3 years ago, Kazuya continued, and her voice became harder. "In this very city, I was publicly called useless because in 5 years of marriage, I couldn't bear a
child.
My husband, the man I loved, stayed silent. And that same evening he
Put me out on the
street because his mother decided he needed a real family." A shocked murmur rolled through the hall. Everyone looked at Xavier and Zenobia. Xavier pulled his head into his shoulders. Zenobia sat motionless like a statue, but rage flared in her eyes.
"I
left," Kazuya continued, ignoring the noise. "I started a new life, but recently I had to return, and I learned a terrible truth. Turns out considered useless just because. Turns out my mother-in-law, Zenobia Street Claire, had long been convinced her own son was infertile." She looked straight at Zenobia. She didn't just believe it.
She
acted. She looked for discreet solutions and found one. She decided that her daughter-in-law, must bear an heir, but not from her son, from his cousin, Langston Street Claire, to keep the bloodline pure and the name intact. The hall gasped. Langston jumped up from his seat. "That's a lie.
She's
crazy. She's taking revenge." he shouted. His face turned crimson. A lie?
Kezia.
Asked calmly. You mean to say there was no evening at the lake house where you purposefully got my husband drunk until
He blacked out?
Mean to say you didn't give me water with a strange taste that made my head spin?
Mean to say Zenobia
Wasn't watching us from the dark hallway controlling the execution of her plan? She took out her phone and displayed that very photo on the big screen behind her, the reflection in the mirror. Zenobia's face coldly watching the
scene.
Langston went pale. He looked at the screen, then at Zenobia, seeking support, but Zenobia was silent. Her face had turned into a stone mask, and at that moment, Soraya stood up. All eyes turned to her, the pregnant wife.
She,
slowly, like in a dream, took a light shawl off her shoulders. Then her hands went to the hem of her dress. She took a deep breath and sharply pulled the dress up. Under the dress there was nothing, only her slender figure and an absolutely flat stomach. The hall froze for a second and then exploded. It wasn't just a hum. It was a roar.
Shock,
disbelief, outrage. People jumped from their seats, pointed fingers, flashes of phone cameras sparkled. This whole pregnancy is a lie, Soraya shouted, and her voice, amplified by Kezia's microphone, carried through the hall. She forced me. Zenobia forced me to wear a fake belly to create an illusion of her son's fertility and finally humiliate Kezia. It was the end. The conspiracy was exposed publicly, mercilessly. Langston, realizing everything was lost, that his patroness was defeated, broke. He sank into his chair and mumbled something, covering his face with his hands. He was crushed. Zenobia's reputation burned in an instant. She sat in the middle of this chaos, this roar of the crowd staring. At one point, her world had collapsed. Her entire clan, all her power built on lies and manipulation, crumbled to dust before the eyes of the whole city.
Kezia gave
them a few seconds to enjoy the spectacle, and then she turned to the last person, Xavier. He sat stunned. He looked at his mother, then at Soraya's flat stomach, then at the crushed Langston. He understood nothing. He was just a spectator in the ruins of his own life. Kezia walked up to his table. She leaned in and said quietly, but so he could hear, "She lied to you about everything, Xavier, especially about what concerns you." She raised her phone again, but this time a different photo was on the screen. A small white plastic test with two clear, bright lines. I took this test the morning of the day of Cairo's party, long before the evening at the lake house. Long before your cousin ever touched me. She was wrong, Xavier. You weren't useless. She pulled a folded piece of paper out of her purse and placed it on the table in front of him. And these are the results of a DNA test I did last week for myself, not for court. You don't have to doubt. Kenzo and Kalia are your children, the Real Street Claire heirs whom you threw out on the street yourself along with their mother. She straightened up. She looked at his face, shattered, distorted by pain and epiphany, but felt nothing.
no bloating.
No pity, only emptiness. This person died for her 3 years ago. She turned and walked toward the exit. She didn't look at the reporters swarming the St. Clair table at security trying to restore order. She just walked through the crowd that parted before her like the sea before Moses. She walked out of the stuffy hall into the fresh night air. She took a deep breath. It was over. The next day, she took Mom from the hospital. A week later, when the scandal died down a bit, she took Kenzo and Kalia and went back to Savannah, to her bakery, to her life. She never heard about the St. Clairs again. Only snippets of rumors reached her, that Zenobia sold the house and left the city, that their business fell apart, that Soraya filed for divorce, and Xavier started drinking. But that was no longer her story. Returning to her apartment above the bakery, the first thing she did was take Pearl St. Clair's old tattered diary and that photo with the reflection in the mirror out of the suitcase. She didn't tear or burn them. She just put them in a box with unnecessary things and put it away on the farthest shelf of the closet.
The
Past was buried. In the evening, having put the children to bed, she took her phone, found the number in her contacts, labeled ex-husband, which she had saved for the lawyer, and without hesitation pressed delete. The contact disappeared from the screen. She put the phone on the table, walked to the window, and looked at the lights of her city. Her city, her future. She was free. And that is how this incredible story of Kezia ended. A story about how one cruel word backed by cowardly silence can destroy a life, but also about how incredible strength can be born from the ashes of that destruction. We walked together with Kezia through humiliation, loneliness, fear, and finally came to her triumph.
But the
Main question remains open, and we want to discuss it.
with you.
What in your opinion is scarier? Active, calculated evil like the kind Zenobia was obsessed with, or the quiet passive betrayal of a weak person like Xavier turned out to be, whose action inflicted the deepest wound on Kezia? Each of us responds to betrayal in our own way. Some break, some forgive, and some, like Kezia, turn their pain into armor and a weapon. She didn't just survive. She returned to restore justice and protect her children. Her public reckoning was cruel, but was it unjust? And perhaps the most interesting twist is the alliance of the two wives, Kezia and Sarah. Two rivals, two victims of one monster, who were able to unite against a common enemy. This proves that sometimes the most unexpected allies appear where we see only enmity. Did you like the story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks, so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see two new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story.